the 1st Congressional District. We're going to move now into the first CD discussion forum, whatever you call. I'm going to introduce now the person who will be moderating that discussion, Paul Paratori from House District 5. Paratori, good Italian name, North Denver. The Democratic Party has a long, long legacy of Italians in North Denver getting out the vote for Democrats. So, in keeping with the North Denver tradition, let me introduce Paul Paratori.
Thank you very much, Kip. As Kip told you, my name is Paul Paratori. I'm the chair of House District 5, and I will be moderating the discussion/Q&A portion of tonight's meeting. At this time, we can have our candidates go ahead and come up. You will already see on the sides of the room that you can sit on. We'll make sure your microphones are on as well. All right. Welcome. So tonight we are, as has been mentioned, having a discussion for the 1st Congressional House District of Colorado. We have our 2 candidates here tonight. Our first is our incumbent Congressional Representative, Degette, on my right. And to my left we have Neal Walia, who is our... Briefly, candidates, there is a set of lights right down there that you can see. They are quite bright, so you shouldn't worry about missing them. You will have 3 minutes for your opening statements. You will be shown the yellow light when you are halfway through your time, and you'll be shown the red light when you have 15 seconds remaining. For our Q&A portion of the debate tonight, you will have 2 minutes. Each question will be directed to both of you, and you will both have 2 minutes to respond. You will have the opportunity to rebut a candidate's answer. You'll have 30 seconds to make one of those rebuttals, and we can have up to 3 of those from each of you per question, so kind of a back and forth. There won't be a light for that segment. I will just be kind of guiding us and keeping us to the clock in a timely manner as possible. There will be some audience-based questions or some community-based questions that were also solicited from members of the community. Those may be addressed to both of you or may be addressed specifically to a candidate as well. As this is a joint effort by House District 4, 5, and 8, we just want to remind everybody, including our candidates that are discussing tonight, that is a reflection on our district, and we believe very much so in the mantra of our professionalism and the integrity of our party. And as a part of that, the extension of our rules would also say we please avoid any kind of direct attacks or, and sticking with the questions at hand, if at all possible. I will do my best to professionally and gently keep us on track tonight. After that, there will be 1 minute and 30 seconds at the very end of everything for both of y'all to have some closing remarks as well, just kind of brief closing remarks and pull everything together as well. And if y'all are ready, we can begin. All right, fantastic. So we're going to begin with a couple of different topics, but the first one on the docket tonight is election.
Are we doing opening statements?
I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, yes, opening statements. So that's an important part, right? So we will begin with opening statements with Degette. And for questions, we will begin with Mr. Neal Walia.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to District 5 and cohorts for hosting this. I have a speech tonight. I left it in my little binder there. You all know my record. You know how I fight for you. 18 children are dead in Texas. It's up to 18 now. And it's hard for all of us to come and go about our business over and over and over again in moments like this. You know, in Congress, we send our thoughts and prayers. Then we have a moment of silence on the House floor. Some years ago, I stopped doing the moment of silence because it's too late for a moment of silence. We have to act.
That's right.
We have to pass gun safety legislation, an issue that I have fought for my entire career. And it's so easy to give up hope. My God, we had Columbine. We had Sandy Hook. We had the Aurora Theater. We had the Boulder grocery store that my daughter lives 1 block or about a mile from, and whose shopping day is that day of the shooting, okay? We've been doing this for too long, and yet somehow we can't pass an assault rifle ban. We can't pass a high-capacity magazine ban. We can't pass a background check. So it's easy to lose hope, but I don't lose hope because I believe truth wins out. I want to tell you about my friend and my role model, John Lewis. He used to get up in the Democratic caucus every time something like this happened. He's the man who almost died crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And he would say, never give up and never give in. And we can't do that. The lives of these little kids are too important. So what do? We keep fighting. It worked for us here in Colorado. In the 1990s, I was the floor leader in the State House on gun safety legislation, and I was put in fear of my life. The Republican legislature killed all of our bills that year, but guess what? The voters acted. The voters voted, and they voted in a Democratic legislature. And since then, we passed HB 22-1086, the Vote Without Fear Act. We passed the Red Flag Bill. We passed a bill limiting high-capacity magazines, and we passed the background check bill. And guess what? People lost their races for that, and that's too bad. So here's what we have to do, my friends. Today, tomorrow, in November, and just like Kip said, next year and the year after, we have to win. We have to elect Democrats at every level, and we have to elect Democrats in U.S. House District 7 and 8, and we have to keep the House, and we have to win 60 votes in the Senate, or we have to eliminate the filibuster, and that's the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Degette. We'll now turn to opening statements from Mr. Neal Walia.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Neal Walia. I'm a progressive Democrat, and I'm running for Congress in Colorado's 1st Congressional District in Denver, Colorado. Before we begin, I want to take the time to thank the Denver Democrats for organizing this forum. I want to thank the Local 720 Union for hosting us here this evening. And I want to thank my opponent, Congresswoman Degette, for being here on stage with me. Grassroots campaigns like mine are often not afforded the opportunity to participate in conversations like this. And so on behalf of me, my wife, my family, and my entire community, I just want to say how much of an honor and a privilege it is to be on stage with you right now to address our communities. I'm the son of Indian immigrants. I'm the first person in my family to be born in the United States. And like many immigrants, my parents came to this country in pursuit of what was known as the American dream. And like my parents, I have taken all the steps that I have been told that would allow me to build a better life for me and my loved ones. I'm someone who's fortunate enough to have gone to undergrad at CU Boulder and graduate school at the University of Colorado at Denver, where I received 2 master's degrees. I taught students for 2 years. That allowed me to get a job with the former governor's office of Colorado, John Hickenlooper, on a team that was committed to fighting homelessness in our state. And that took me out to Washington, D.C., where I spent a handful of years of my career working in and out of the halls of Congress in our nation's capital. And yet, in spite of taking all of these steps, like many of us here in this room, my life feels like it's in a more vulnerable place than it's ever felt. My wife and I are being crushed by a lifetime of student debt. We cannot afford to buy a home in the city that we love. The cost of childcare actively delays our ability to begin our family, and now our parents are actively delaying their retirement, not only because of the economic insecurity that they face, but like many of you in the audience, they're asking themselves a very important question. Do I still have a role left to play in shaping the future of my children, of my grandchildren? It was feeling all of these pressures in our own lives and knowing that there are millions of Americans across this country who are going through exactly what I'm going through, if not completely worse. That is why I am running for Congress. Our communities deserve to have a representative who lives the struggles of their constituents, but more importantly, will fight to fix them as if their lives depended on it, because my life does. Now, tonight, you all are going to have the opportunity to hear the different visions that Congresswoman Degette and I have for our communities once we're elected into office. And throughout this night, I'm hoping you all can answer three important questions. Who are we? Who do we want to be? And what are we willing to fight for? Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm very much looking forward to answering the questions that you prepared for us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Walia, as well, for your impassioned comments. All right. Having had our opening statements, we will now move to the substance of our discussion, which are a number of questions for our candidates to answer. The first question we're going to talk about has to do with election integrity. As our Secretary of State most eloquently put, there's a lot that is under attack right now. Many key public figures and a significant portion of the voting public have embraced conspiracy theories after the 2020 election, and the 2021 Colorado Political Climate Survey identified that 68% of voters believed that Colorado elections would be done fairly. However, only 49% believe that to be true for federal elections. There has been no shortage of legislation throughout the country seeking to add restrictions that would make voting harder and less accessible for many. And such calls have even been made here in our state of Colorado. To our candidates, can our election system be trusted? And what do you feel are the main causes of this issue? And what can be done to restore public trust and ensure this problem gets better, not worse? And we will start with Mr. Walia.
All right, thank you so much for that question. And I think the short answer is that, fortunately, in a state like Colorado, we can trust our election system thanks to the good work of Secretary Griswold, who is fighting very hard for us to make sure that the integrity of our elections are strong and secure going forward. And I want to say that I'm very happy to hear that Congresswoman Degette brought up Representative John Lewis, because I think one of the most important pieces of legislation that we need to be passing in the House is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And in the spirit of Congressman Lewis, the most important step that we can take at this moment in time to ensuring that we are voting for our rights is to abolish the filibuster. We know for a fact that right now, the 60-vote barrier that we have in the Senate is preventing us from taking a real step forward and not only fighting for our voting rights, but codifying reproductive rights into federal laws and a number of other progressive priorities that we all care about. The filibuster is a racist tool that was designed to historically segregate communities of color in this country since its inception. We have to abolish the filibuster. We have to do everything that we can while Democrats host the majority in the House, the Senate, and the presidency to fight for what we care about. Because as the moderator said, the Republican Party has been very clear about what's coming next. Roe versus Wade is just the start. Our voting rights are next, our human rights are next, and in this moment, we have to act. We have the ability to act now, and it's time that we took that step forward. While I have a little bit more time, I think one of the biggest problems that we face as a nation is disinformation. It is the idea that our elections are insecure. It is the idea that rights that we have or the freedoms that we have are under attack, when the reality is that many of us know that they're not. We have to commit to investments into education. We have to commit to culturally combating disinformation. And I think doing these things will allow us to secure our election integrity going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Walia. 2 minutes to Congresswoman Degette.
Thank you. Well, I agree. Colorado's elections are some of the safest and fairest in the country. And in addition, on a bipartisan basis, we have worked to make sure they're accessible. We're one of the states that has the universal vote by mail, where everybody can vote, and even unaffiliated voters can vote in the primary. And I would, though, say that nationwide, our elections are pretty safe and secure nationwide as well. The disinformation, the distrust came from one person, Donald Trump, and his supporters, and we have to work every day to stop that here in Colorado and nationwide. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is a good way to start. That bill, which I was an original co-sponsor of, actually did pass the House, and it's stuck in the Senate. Another bill that's really critical is the For the People Act, H.R. 1. That's a broad election reform bill that has many things about voter registration, access to the ballot, and public funding for elections, which I am a strong supporter of as well. That bill also passed the House and is stuck in the Senate. And I agree with Mr. Walia that the Senate should abolish the filibuster because 60 is not democratic. 50 plus 1 is democratic, right? Am I right about that? Yeah. So that's what we have to do. But guess what? You know, Chuck Schumer doesn't do what I tell him to do, if you can believe that. And so what we need to do is what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia last time, and the two senators, Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff. And we need to fight every day to pass the John Lewis Act and the For the People Act. And we also need to overcome any barriers they try to put up against us in Colorado, in Georgia, or any place else, so we can make sure everybody qualified to vote casts their ballot in November.
Congresswoman Degette, is there any rebuttal?
Be nice.
First, let's echo everything that Congresswoman Degette said, and I'm going to revisit this point a couple times throughout the course of this evening, which is the necessity for the Democratic Party to holistically reject corporate PAC dollars. Because what we know is that corporations are actively funding the very same problems and the very same candidates that we are fighting against. And so if we truly care about combating what we're talking about, which is election insecurity, disinformation, and all of these issues, we have to stop being or creating the problems that we're fighting against. That starts with rejecting corporate money and stopping the vehicles of financing that are putting forward Republican candidates who are spreading the disinformation that is harming our country.
I will just say when we pass H.R. 1, then there will be no corporate PAC money. But right now, I have to comply with the election laws that we have. And if anybody thinks that by someone making a campaign contribution to me, it impacts my vote, I'm going to suggest that you tune in to C-SPAN tomorrow morning. I'm chairing the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee investigation into the baby formula, and I have hauled all the companies in to testify about why in the United States in 2022 we have a shortage of baby formula, and you can see if I'm in anybody's pocket when you watch that.
Thank you, Congresswoman Degette. If there is nothing else for this question, we can move to the next question. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Are we allowed to?
You are, absolutely are.
So, I think we should acknowledge what Congresswoman Degette is saying is true, right? I do not necessarily think that her votes have been purchased. But we are talking about a corporate system that is not just buying her vote, and which I'm not trying to say, but they are buying the votes of the majority of people in the House and Senate. And so although I can say that it is admirable that Congresswoman Degette as an individual has not allowed the corporate influence to necessarily pervade her decision making, that's not the case across the House. That is not the case that's happening in the Senate. And so rejecting corporate PAC money isn't just about the individual vote. It is about fueling the systems of corruption and inequality that are rampant in American politics. And so I will simply just echo that it is more than just one individual vote. Rejecting corporate PAC dollars enhances our entire democracy, and the Democratic Party has to take more aggressive steps to walking the walk.
All right, with that, we'll move to the next topic, which is a timely topic. It is abortion access. This question will first go to Congresswoman Degette. The Colorado legislature recently passed HB 22-1279, the Reproductive Health Equity Act. This law protects the rights of individuals in Colorado to make reproductive health decisions without government interference. It is likely that Roe v. Wade will be overturned in full or in part this Supreme Court judicial session. Is the Colorado bill enough to protect abortion access in our state? Have Democrats already missed the opportunity to protect abortion access at the federal level? And what will you do to ensure that our state is not threatened?
This question's been weighing so heavily on my mind because, as most of you know, I've been an active advocate for a full woman's right to make her own reproductive health care decisions, including abortion, for my entire career, even before I was in politics. When I was in the Colorado legislature, I passed the bubble bill to allow people to get clinic access through a Republican-controlled legislature, and it's been upheld by the Supreme Court twice. When I got to Congress, I was fighting every day for a woman's right to reproductive decisions. And now I'm the co-chair of the pro-choice caucus. Most people don't realize, when I got to Congress, the Congress had 30 anti-choice Democrats, 30 anti-choice Democrats. We didn't have a pro-choice majority in the U.S. House until 2018. So what did I do for all those years? I spent all my time, number one, trying to convince Catholic politicians from blue-collar districts that no matter what their personal beliefs were, that publicly they needed to give everybody the right to make their decision. That's the first thing I did. The second thing I did is make sure that the Republicans didn't codify the Hyde Amendment and other bad things that we couldn't get out. And it worked. I managed to keep language out of the Affordable Care Act that would have restricted people's ability to get insurance for abortions. So in 2018, when we finally got the pro-choice majority, along with 4 or 5 people that I personally convinced to change their opinion, we decided to go for a ride with that. And in this year, when we had a Democratic president, we passed a bill to codify Roe versus Wade. And I was directly responsible for getting that bill on the floor and getting the votes to pass it through the House. We also, we also stripped the Hyde Amendment from all the appropriations bills this year for the first time. And we're going to do it again. But you know, it's that pesky Senate again. And that's why we do have to eliminate the filibuster and why we have to fight every day to make sure we hold the House and to make sure we win more seats in the U.S. Senate. Thank you.
Yeah, first, I'll start by commending Congresswoman Degette's long legacy on this issue. She has been a tireless advocate on this, and she deserves all the praise that she receives on it. First, I want to start by saying abortion is healthcare. Abortion is a human right. And in this moment in time, we know that the Republican Party is coming for Roe versus Wade. They've said it. They have stacked the court strategically to ensure that the moment that we are experiencing as a collective right now would take place. And so it comes back again to knowing that while Democrats maintain the majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and the presidency, what can we do right now to combat this? Congresswoman Degette already said it. First and foremost, we have to start with abolishing the filibuster. The second thing that I'm hoping people of Congress can start advocating for is stacking, or I should say expanding, the Supreme Court. The Republican Party is fighting fire with fire. And unless we start doing the same thing and doing everything in our arsenal to combat the conservative majority on the Supreme Court with more progressive Supreme Court justices, Roe versus Wade will just be the start. Brown versus Board of Education is next, as well as a number of other rights that we are experiencing. Second, we have to stop taking money from corporations, and there are a large number of corporate established Democrats who are taking corporate money from those who are fueling anti-choice PACs, but also anti-choice Republican candidates that are creating the problem that we are fighting against. We cannot claim to fix the problems that we care about if we are in turn creating them. And the final piece of the equation that I want to talk about is the need for us to continue speaking out against people in both parties who are challenging our rights. And so one thing I am hoping to do when I'm elected into Congress is to be that voice of accountability. I am not beholden to any corporation. This campaign has not taken a single penny from any corporate entity, and that in turn will allow us to be the tremendous advocate that we need to be once we're elected into office.
So I just want to add a little bit to all the things we're saying about the Senate and the court. That's all true, but for now, what we have to stop against really bad legislation passing is the U.S. House of Representatives. I told you we passed the bill to codify Roe versus Wade. We stripped the Hyde Amendment out of the appropriations bills. But when the Republicans control the House, here's some of the bills they introduced. In the 115th Congress, the Sanctity of Life Act, say no more. The Parental Notification and Intervention Act. No taxpayer funding for abortion and abortion insurance full disclosure act. Taxpayer Conscience Protection Act, protecting life and integrity in research, which would have stopped fetal tissue research, which has led to many, many vaccines, including the coronavirus vaccine. So our bulwark against all of this is keeping the U.S. House in 2022. And that is what I'm committed to doing, because, as well as fighting all of these other battles. Because when we keep a pro-choice majority in the House, when we take the Senate, I hope we eliminate the filibuster, when the voters speak, that's when we can solve this problem.
So one thing I want to remind everyone that's happening actually tonight in Texas, there is a Democratic primary taking place between an anti-choice Democrat named Henry Cuellar versus a pro-choice grassroots progressive candidate named Jessica Cisneros. And in the past month, senior Democratic leadership, including Speaker Pelosi and Representative Jim Clyburn, have been actively supporting an anti-choice Democrat in Henry Cuellar. So I just want to kind of paint a picture that says, yes, of course, we know that the Republican Party is not in favor of pro-choice, and we know what they're coming for, but there is a desperate need for us to improve the leadership and the efficacy in the Democratic Party. And while, again, we have the majority in this brief window of time, we have to take every action in our power to make sure that we codify this into law. And I am very concerned that in this moment, we are shooting ourselves in the foot by making sure that a Democrat who is anti-choice is being elected into the House. The margins are so thin on everything that we vote on, and as a party in this moment, we are supporting an anti-choice candidate. We have work to do as a Democratic Party moving forward, and once I'm elected into office, I hope to be the voice of accountability that sees the Democratic Party improve as a whole.
As a reminder to our candidates, you do have 3 rebuttals, but they are limited to 30 seconds apiece. And you have 3 rebuttals per question, but they're 30 seconds apiece. So I'm trying to be as flexible as possible, but I felt like those comments needed to be more than 30 seconds. The next question that we're going to talk about is gun violence, which unfortunately tonight is another salient topic. We're now sitting here in the aftermath of yet another shooting, this time at an elementary school. This is on the heels of a shooting in New York just last week. As of this year, gun violence is the leading cause of death in the United States for our children. And out of all of the guns that are owned in the entire world for non-military purposes, 40% of them are in the United States. This question will first go to Mr. Walia. If you are elected, what are the steps that need to be taken immediately in order to solve the problem of gun violence? And how will we overcome the stalemate that is running on 20, 30, even 40 years of deadlock in Congress?
Obviously, as we walked into this evening, I knew this would be a question that we would have to answer, and I was trying desperately to think of what the right thing to say is, what kind of solutions I could set forth, but the reality is that we're failing as a country on this issue, and that I think I can safely say that as a team, as people in this room, and even between me and Congresswoman Degette, that I think we all agree on what the solutions are that have to be done as we move forward. Of course, like many of you, I believe in more effective gun regulation. Of course, I believe that we have to increase mental health services. Of course, there are so many laws and proposals that we've heard time and again that we can echo again and again, but as I said, it's not working. And I think what I also want to kind of frame is that this is not just a gun violence issue. This is also a white supremacy issue. Right now, in our Congress and in our culture, white supremacists are running rampant and are advocating for a culture of violence against BIPOC communities nationwide. And as much as I want to sit here and talk about certain laws that we can be passing and certain things we can be doing to improve the outcomes on this very poisonous aspect of American culture, I feel like it would be totally disingenuous for me to just say the same things over and over again when we realize that this is not going to be the last time that a day like this happens. And so I think the best thing I can say in order to honor the victims of today, yesterday, and sadly the victims of tomorrow and the future are to say that I will holistically commit to fighting for more effective regulations. I will holistically commit to fighting for healthcare and more access into resources that can create healthier communities. And I will continue to stand with the victims and the communities who suffer at the hands of gun violence and white nationalism every single day.
Well, I thought this issue was so important that I jettisoned my opening statement to talk to you about gun violence. And I'm sitting here trying to think what else I can tell you. And I guess what it is, when Sandy Hook happened, when Columbine happened, I was in my second term in Congress, and I had just come from being the point person in the Colorado legislature on gun violence. I remember one day I was down on the floor making my arguments, and in the gallery were about 50 women, gun advocates, and they stood up and en masse and stared me down. I've been threatened by the NRA, I've had death threats, and I've been threatened. They particularly pick out women politicians. They say we don't know how guns work. They say we don't know the terminology. And so I actually went and learned how AR-15s work. I learned how they make high-capacity magazines. And you know what? There is no place for these things in our society. We can talk about such important issues like mental health and getting more resources and so on. But the thing all of these people have in common, they all used a gun. In the Aurora Theater, we had SWAT team members and military members in that theater who were trained. But that shooter had high-capacity magazines, and so he was able to mow down a whole theater of people within seconds. And that's why we can never give up and we can never give in. And what's the answer? We have to elect politicians who will actually make this happen. Now, there is some hope, because before, the NRA and the gun manufacturers used to have control over the ballot box. But now, we have a lot of groups, Everytown, Gabby Gifford's group, all these other groups that are pushing back on the other side. And I just hope, I know Mr. Walia does not intend to stop contributions from groups like that, but it's important that we fight on the same turf to say, this, we can't become numb. This can never happen again.
Thank you to both of you. The next question we have is somewhat of a less heavy statement. It's a contrast question, so actually the substance of the question will be the same, but it will be worded differently to each one of you. And we will begin with Congresswoman Degette. To Congresswoman Degette, incumbents who are facing primary challengers are often criticized for losing their focus to the system. And some voters may feel that when you're in DC for a long period of time, or spent too much of a part of DC, become a part of the institution and all of its insiders, movers, shakers, and thus are not as effective as you could be. How would you respond to such concerns?
Well, the first thing I'll say is, I'm a Denver girl. I'm a fourth generation Denverite, and I grew up here. And people say to me, how often do you get home? I say, are you kidding me? Where would you be? Denver, Colorado, or Washington, D.C., really? I mean, I come home pretty much every weekend. And so I am in the community, and I have roots in the community that I have had for many, many years. I don't take anything for granted. I'm always a little bit shocked when my opponents say, oh, thank you for debating me, because that's part of the system. I always debate my opponents because I think I deserve to prove to you why I should be rehired every 2 years. And I hope I'm doing that tonight. In the meantime, though, we do need people who can figure out, for example, like I did, when President Biden took office, I knew that we only needed 50+1 votes in the Senate to disapprove the methane rule that Trump did. So I did a bill. It was one of the 2 biggest bills to stop these emissions in the history of our country. I did a bill and I passed it into law, and I got it signed by President Biden to curb methane emissions, and it's in effect today. Now, that's the kind of insider information you can have, and you can still be effective. I'll give you one more example. I told you we had a vote to codify Roe versus Wade. The morning after the the Supreme Court decision on Texas, I called up Speaker Pelosi on her cell phone. I said, Nancy, we knew this day might come, the pro-choice caucus. We have a bill, the Women's Health Protection Act. We have 203 co-sponsors, and I will guarantee you, if we put this up on the floor next week, I will have the 218 votes to pass it. She said, okay, Diana, thanks a lot. 1 hour later, she put out a press release saying this bill will be up on the floor next week. And then it was, and we passed it with 218 votes. That would not have happened to a junior member of Congress. For one thing, Nancy wouldn't have believed that they had counted the votes. So that's the advantage that experience gives you, but I agree, you still have to stay very involved in your community.
Thank you, Congresswoman Degette. To Mr. Walia, the question that you would receive is, some voters may be concerned by your lack of experience as an elected official working in a legislature, and they may also be concerned that as a newcomer to Congress, you would not have the seniority and influence as a long-term incumbent. And how would you address those concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what I'll start by saying is saying what I said in my introduction, which is I spent 5 years of my career working in Washington, D.C., in and out of the halls of Congress. And so when it comes to direct work experience, this is something that I'm very familiar with. It is a space that I know well, and it is a space that I believe I can be a tremendous leader in. And I think when we're talking both in the earlier question about seniority, right, and being in Congress for a long time, I once again want to bring back the topic of corporate PAC money. Because once again, we have this conversation about knowing that the same corporations that are harming our country and our communities, they're actively funding both parties at the same time. That is a main reason for why we have the gridlock that we've experienced in Washington, D.C. Once again, this is not a conversation about individuals, it is a conversation about systems, and if we know that the corporate PAC influence is fracturing our national politics, it is incumbent upon us for us to take a major step away from that. Now, the question of one thing I want everyone to answer in this moment: has the seniority of our leadership in our district prevented the cost of housing from reaching record levels high? Has it prevented the cost of health care from bankrupting the American family? Has it prevented your lives from becoming more vulnerable and more economically insecure? And if the answer is no, then I want you all to think about what is going to happen when in the June 28th Democratic primary, we elect our district's first person of color to ever represent this district, when we elect the only federal representative in this entire state who has never accepted a penny of corporate PAC dollars and send them into the halls of Congress. Let me remind you that we are a D+57 district. We are the most progressive district on this side of the United States of America. When we're elected into office, it's time that Denver becomes a leading voice in the fight for a Green New Deal, for healthcare as a human right, and housing for all. And once I'm elected into office, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
So here's a place where I really am getting things done for the 1st Congressional District, which is now pretty much Denver. Last year, for the first time in over 10 years, members were able to direct spending to projects within their districts. Homelessness was something I've worked on for the bulk of my career, even again when I was practicing law before I went to Congress. And I saw the opportunity to take this really serious problem that we're facing in Denver and to actually make an impact on it. And so working with many of the community-based organizations that I've known for years, organizations like the Coalition for the Homeless, Urban Peak, Denver Health, I was actually able to get $13 million to go directly to those organizations to develop housing and wraparound services like mental health for the homeless. This year, my member-directed spending projects, I'm building on that, and I've also targeted homelessness and the related issues, and I have requested $40 million this year. So that's something I've just directly done when I could, which was this last 2 years.
First, let's applaud the fact that every single dollar that the federal government can invest into the housing crisis and the homeless crisis is a major step forward. We need these investments, but I think what has become frustrating to watch is that we have now started to come into a pattern of reactivity. 2005 is when Mayor Hickenlooper first started Denver's Road Home. That was his way of planting a very important commitment in our city, in our district, that the housing crisis, that the homeless crisis is something that requires proactive engagement on. But what we have found that is happening in the federal government is that we often wait for these problems to become full-blown crises. And so while I will say that all of the dollars that we are fighting for these various organizations who are working on these critical issues is applauded, it is not enough to stop the rising number of unhoused individuals. It is not enough to prevent this very predatory real estate market from continuing to put families on the streets. This is why our campaign has been so committed to focusing on the issue of homelessness. And if you visit our website, you will see a very comprehensive framework and a proactive set of steps that we can take as a district to not only end homelessness in our district, but across the country. It starts by first introducing a homes guarantee resolution onto the House, elevating homelessness and housing to a national priority, and triggering multi-billion-dollar investments into permanent supportive housing, but also affordable housing. From there, we have to move towards providing healthcare as a human right. That is why we believe in Medicare for all, coupled with mental health services. We know that when our families are put into homes and our unhoused neighbors are put into homes, they will need to heal and take a step forward. And the final piece of this equation is the Green New Deal. Not only is it a strong commitment in putting us away from the climate catastrophe that we're all experiencing, but is the opportunity to build and create a new economy from the bottom up that sees working class and middle class families all across the country thrive. The federal government has a unique ability to create millions of jobs through this vehicle. Jobs that pay a thriving wage, that provide comprehensive benefits, and jobs that can target disenfranchised communities, such as the unhoused, who may have, let's say, a minor felony on their background for something like marijuana possession. The federal government can waive these barriers to entry, and so when we're talking about addressing this crisis, Let's put our unhoused neighbors into homes. Let's pass Medicare for all. Let's create a green economy. And doing this will not only end the homeless crisis right here in our district, but it will change the game nationally, because we know that this crisis is not just a Denver issue, it is a national issue.
A lot there to unpack. I'll just say this. This is one thing. As a politician, I'm not interested in just supporting ideas. I'm interested in getting stuff done. The Green New Deal, I support many of their goals, but I'm not sure if you're aware of this. The Green New Deal is a resolution. What that means is, if we pass the Green New Deal, do you know what our climate goal would be in law? Nothing. It's just a resolution. The other housing resolution that Mr. Walia said he would introduce, wonderful idea. If it got passed into law, do you know how many new housing units would be built for homeless people? 0, because it's just a resolution. I prefer, on climate change, for example. Climate change is an existential threat to us, to our children, and to my new little grandbaby Eva. And I want to tell you, I have a bill that will take us to the same goals, the same emissions goals as the Green New Deal by 2035. That's an actual bill. And I'm working on getting bipartisan, bicameral support on it right now, because if we could pass that, it actually would bend the curve and set standards so we could get to 0 emissions. I agree with all these housing ideas too, but we actually have to have policies in law and money in law to build the units. And P.S., I'm a original co-sponsor of the Medicare for All bill too, and we need to do that too.
That ends the segment of our evening that is prepared questions, only because we want to leave some time for questions that were submitted by the community. We will, time allowing, have at least 1 or 2 questions that are for both candidates, but also 1 or 2 questions, or 1 question that is for each candidate specifically. For those questions, you will have your full time to respond, and there will not be a back and forth necessarily for that question. And so the next person to receive a question is Mr. Walia. And what I have here is a question submitted by Julius. The question is, while progressive goals align with my values, several of them seem unrealistic to achieve in today's Washington, exactly as they are. How will you balance advocating for your ideal goals with the pragmatism and compromise necessary to push things through?
Thank you, Julius, for the question. I'll just start by saying that every single thing, every single right that we have fought for the course of generations once started as an idea. And it took a tremendous amount of leadership, sacrifice, and advocacy for us to turn these ideas into reality. And we'll go back on the Green New Deal as one of the case in points. We should talk about the fact that there are 20 members in Congress who have signed on as sponsors to the Green New Deal, as well as a number of national organizations that are racial justice focused, that are labor focused, that are human rights focused, who acknowledge that the climate catastrophe is the greatest existential threat that we receive as a public, and that the Green New Deal is the most effective path forward to mitigating this crisis. And so I'll also talk about the fact that this concept that I think we're kind of alluding to when it comes to the topic of bipartisanship, working across the aisle, I think it's time for us to realize that that is no longer possible in today's Washington, D.C. The Republican Party is not interested in collaborating with Democrats on a single issue. They have effectively become the party of no, and the corporate money that both parties receives will effectively ensure that no matter what happens, the gridlock in Washington, D.C. will continue. And so that's why my commitment is to knowing that once I'm going to Washington, D.C., it's not enough anymore to just put your pen on a piece of legislation. We need to take the power of the 1st Congressional District, and we need to stand with community, with local government, state, and federal actors, both here in Colorado and regionally, and use the power of advocacy and organizing to empower those communities and our leaders to make change and to move forward towards the idealistic goals that we all want to see happen. It is possible in our lifetime to see a Green New Deal be signed into law. It is possible for healthcare to become a human right, and it is definitely possible to make the investments necessary that sees homelessness in this country ends. And I think one of the things that makes me uniquely equipped to do this is being detached and not being connected to any private or corporate interest. I will go to Washington, D.C. and lead on my values and my ideals. And I think everyone in this room would agree that it is time to stop doing things the way we have been doing for the last several decades and take a real step forward and be ambitious in the goals that we have and what we are fighting for.
Thank you. All right, Congresswoman Degette, I have a question for you. This question was submitted by Deepak Walia. After many after many terms in Congress,
with all due respect,
respectfully, with many terms in Congress, District 1, some voters may be concerned that you take them for granted and take their votes for granted. If not, would you please explain to the audience in the last 25 years how many times you have visited and or how you have connected with your voters in your district in person?
Well, when I go over to the grocery store every weekend, I connect with voters. When I go over to my alma mater, South High School, and talk to the students there, I connect with voters. When I go over to Swansea, Elyria, and Globeville and talk to the community residents about the contamination that is in their areas, I'm connecting with the voters. I mean, I take my job as in Congress seriously. And the other thing that's really great about this district, I tell people in Washington all the time, this is the best congressional district in the country because it's so diverse. We have everything here. We have wealth. We have great poverty. We have racial and gender diversity. And we have everything in between. And it's an exciting district to represent because there's always a new challenge. And I take that very seriously. Something else I want to point out, I'll just pretend this is a town hall meeting for a minute, but I do in-person and telephone town hall meetings on a regular basis. On my last telephone town hall meeting a couple of weeks ago, we had over 13,000 people on the phone. And so we do that, but also I have a wonderful staff here in Denver. Joe, could you stand up? She gets embarrassed. This is Joe Middleton. She's my chief of staff. And over the pandemic, we helped thousands of our constituents with housing, with unemployment, with Social Security, and everything else. And so we're there all the time in the community, and I'm proud of that because I get to represent the place I grew up in. I just want to say one thing about bipartisanship because that came up. I agree, it's pretty toxic in Washington right now, but I will say this, if bipartisanship is dead in everything, I think that's a shame. And I'll give you one example. I'm the co-chair of the Diabetes Caucus in Congress. My daughter Francesca has diabetes. And we're working on a bill right now, House and Senate, Susan Collins, Jean Shaheen, Tom Reed, and me, bipartisan, bicameral, to lower insulin prices to $35 a bottle. We actually think we can pass that and get it to the president.
Yeah. The next question is to both candidates. So we will return to the format of 2 minutes for each response and then a lot of rebuttals. The question will first go to Mr. Walia. This was submitted by Kiran Wasim. The recent murder of Shireen Abu Akleh by Israeli forces marks the continuation of an assault on democratic institutions by Israel and is one carried out with our tacit support. Do you believe that the incident should be investigated by the international community?
Yeah, of course it should be investigated. And let's make something clear. What is happening in Israel, in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, is apartheid. It is human rights atrocities that take place every single day. And this has been the case for several years. And so, when we're talking about how can we engage on human rights atrocities and how can we acknowledge and as a country make better steps forward, the first thing, and I'm going to get back to this again and again, we have to stop taking corporate PAC money from organizations like AIPAC, who are militant, conservative, and are not interested in a two-state solution. In fact, this conversation is oftentimes used as a barrier for meaningful engagement on the very topic that we're discussing. So the first commitment I can make to every single one of you is that I will never take money from organizations that are fighting against human rights, and I will use my voice to speak out against human rights atrocities not just taking place in Israel and in Palestine, but all across the world. And another thing that we have to commit to as a country is to stop sending our public dollars to countries that we know are committing human rights violations. And we do this repeatedly over and over and over again. It goes back to being part of the problems that we are supposedly solving. And so, yes, let us call for an investigation. Let us stand with Palestine. Free Palestine. And I am dedicated to being an advocate and speaking out against every single human rights atrocities that I can speak out against once I'm elected into Congress.
Yes, obviously this death should be investigated by the international community as a human rights abuse. But more than that, we need to remain committed to a two-state solution in Israel and between Israel and Palestine. And I want to tell you, I've been to Israel twice now. And the last time I went, I actually went with a group named J Street. Some of you may have heard about them. But they're a group that strongly supports the two-state solution. And I went and I saw the settlements that are happening. And these settlements are causing increasing pressure on the whole ability to have a two-state solution. So one thing I think we need to immediately work with our government and our State Department to put pressure on Israel to stop the settlements and to reverse those, because that is stopping our ability to have a two-state solution. But I will say one more thing, because my grandfather's parents were Jews, and they were ejected from Poland during the pogroms in the early 20th century, late 19th century. Israel was first conceived as a homeland for the Jews. When you think about what happened to Jews in World War II, we can't have any more anti-Semitism, we can't have any more racism, but we also can't have that racism against Palestinians. That's simply wrong and it's inhumane. And so here's what I see as a U.S. senior elected official. I see my role as to advocate strongly for the two-state solution and to do everything I can to make sure every individual living in those lands has full human rights and can live their life the way they want to. And that's what we should all be working together. It's not Israel versus Palestine. We need homelands for both, and we need a two-state solution.
All right, I want to thank both of our candidates tonight for being here and for engaging in a fantastic discussion. We have just enough time for closing remarks, and for that we will begin with Congresswoman Degette. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Great job. And Mr. Walia, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing the stage with me. I really appreciate you doing it. And I want to say thanks to all of you for being civic-minded. It is really important. my staff told me I should talk about me a little bit because I'm such a policy wonk. I always talk about all of the bills I'm doing, all the public policies. I'm going to tell you about myself. As I said, I grew up right here in Denver. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My youngest sibling is 6.5 years younger than I am. Maybe that's why I'm the co-chair of the pro-choice caucus. But I grew up with a single mom who was a kindergarten teacher in the DPS. And when I was 13 years old, I decided I wanted to become a storefront lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, to help right the injustices of society. We had no lawyers in our family. So I went on to college. I got a scholarship for public interest law to New York University Law School, and I moved home the next day and I started my law practice, fighting for justice. I became a public defender and I fought for justice. Eventually, I decided I could do more representing people in elected office than I could just doing one case at a time. So that's what I did. That's what I do today. I fight for justice every single day, and I please implore you, help join me in this fight. March with me to keep the House and to take the 8th and the 7th congressional districts in Colorado so that we can continue to bend that arc that Martin Luther King talked so eloquently about, and so that we can have all the justice that our children and our grandchildren deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walia. A minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you all so much again for giving me the opportunity to be here tonight. The most rewarding experience of the campaign has been the opportunity to be present in our communities, in our neighborhoods, talking with our neighbors about what we want our futures to look like together. Time and again, I've been inspired by the communities of our district. Communities like the Latinx community in the North Side, who are actively fighting against a wave of gentrification that is destroying their heritage. Our neighbors in Globeville and Elyria, Swansea, who champion environmental justice every single day. From individuals like Pastor Bob and Mrs. Eddy at the Agape Church in 5 Points, who are working hand in hand with their neighbors to build affordable housing and create a new economy for all of us to thrive in. As we move forward from today, there will be those who dismiss us. But what I know now is what I have always known about the communities of our district. We are ready to take a real step forward. We are ready to be a leading voice in the fight for a green economy, in the fight for healthcare as a human right, and in the fight for housing for all. Thank you all so much again for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you so much to Congresswoman Degette for giving me this honor. Tonight, I am asking you for your trust. Please vote for Neal Walia in the June 28th Democratic primary. Thank you.
And thank you all for being